And welcome to the online book club of the Association of Jewish Refugees. My name is Debra Barnes and I run the My Story Life Book Project for AJR. For anyone not familiar with AJR, we are the national charity supporting Britain's Jewish refugees and survivors of Nazi oppression, and we are committed to the education of others about the Holocaust. For more information about what we do, please go to our website. Also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. As is usual with our online events, we're going to keep everyone on mute. But if you would like to ask a question of our speaker, you can write it in the chat function and we will get to as many questions as possible. We'll do our best to include everyone. We are recording the session and it will be made available on our YouTube channel. So if you don't want to appear in the recording, simply turn off your camera. Right, so our guest speaker today is Liz Kessler, who we are delighted is able to join us. Liz is the author of 23 books for children and young adults. Her books range from early readers to books for young adults and include the best-selling series about half-mermaid Emily Windsnap. Liz's books have sold over 5 million copies in 25 languages. Liz's new novel, which is this one, When the World Was Ours, was inspired by her father's childhood escape from the Nazis just before the Second World War. The book is aimed at young and not so young adults. So welcome, Liz. Thank you very much for joining us on this cold and snowy day. Right, so let's go straight in. And do you want to tell us something about your father's experiences and how they inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, so my dad was, he was born in 1930, and in 1934, he was living in Vienna with his parents, Jewish family, and he just had a whooping cough. And as a treat, after he'd been ill, his father, my grandfather, took him for a ride on a Danube steamer. When my dad was on the boat, he was there, this little 4-year-old boy, kneeling on a seat to look out of the window, and his feet sticking out behind him were close to a woman that came and sat down next to him. So his father said, be careful not to scuff the woman's dress. Simple as that. Be careful not to scuff this woman's dress. At which point the woman, Gladys Jones, who was there with her husband William, said to my grandfather, oh, it's fine, in sort of broken German, because they were English. It's fine, and what a lovely boy. And they got into conversation. And in fact, they got into such conversation that they missed the stop that they were meant to have got off with the rest of their party. So my grandfather said, look, I'll take you back to your hotel, and why don't you come and meet my wife and come and have some of her cake, and we'll show you our Vienna tomorrow. So they did that. And then sometime later, they received a thank you letter from the Joneses. And then my dad still has this thank you letter today. And that was that. And then some years later, and it was now 1938, and the Anschluss happened, and things were getting very serious, and they had to get out of Vienna, really, get out of Austria. And they were able to go to Czechoslovakia, because my grandfather was Czech. And then within less than a year, the Nazis had invaded Czechoslovakia as well, by which time it was getting incredibly difficult to get out of the country as Jews. And they had to go through all sorts of hoops, and you know, it was a terrible process to try and get out. And even once they'd got everything in order, the one thing they didn't have was an affidavit from somebody in another country that would help them to get the visa they needed. And they didn't know anybody. And then my grandfather came across, in his files, he came across the letter from the Joneses nearly 5 years earlier, and he wrote to them, and they wrote back. They had, you know, literally they'd had no contact other than that letter over the years. They wrote back and they said, yes, we'll do everything. And they helped them to get the visas. They brought them to England. They gave them a home with them for the best part of a year. And they were, you know, as I'm sure you know, they undoubtedly saved their lives. So that was the starting point for my book. I'd always wanted to, I suppose for about 10 years really, I'd wanted to write something. My dad's often said to me, oh, why don't you write a book about, about what happened to me? And I've never really wanted to write my dad's story. I've kind of been more interested, you know, I'm sure you'll relate to this, Deborah, as a writer, that I've always been more interested in like the other side, the what if, you know, what if that moment had never happened? What if Gladys Jones had simply sat on that seat over there instead of that seat over there? You know, that would have changed everything. So, so yeah, the what if was, and the shadow side, I suppose, of my dad's story was what I wanted to write. But yeah, so that was the inspiration for the book.
So actually, I know you told me that you haven't read my book. So I'll just say there are actually some similarities, because your dad was saved by whooping cough, you could say, and my mum was saved by measles. So, right. And similar ages. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. What if neither of them had caught these illnesses? We might not be here.
Yeah, and you know, can I just say, I have got your book at the very top of my
Don't worry, it's not about my book, don't worry. No, please. Oh.
No, I'm desperate to read it. I honestly can't wait to read it, Deborah. And yeah, that's the thing that's kind of, as a writer, has obsessed me, really. I mean, if I could write for the rest of my life, write books about the tiny moments that our lives turn on, then I probably would. And in fact, it was when I wrote another book called A Year Without Autumn, which is about a girl who, it's a time slip book, and this tiny moment happens and she tries to get back in time to change that moment. And it was as I was writing that book, and I was writing an article about it for a newspaper actually, that it hit me that the reason that I'm so obsessed with this idea is because it's so deeply rooted inside me, that was, you know, that's why I'm here. And, you know, that's probably why I love Sliding Doors and It's a Wonderful Life and all these, you know, all these films that, you know, that kind of that tiny moment that everything turns on.
I'm just getting a message on my screen to say that my internet connection is unstable. So if I disappear, my colleague Alex is going to chat with you. Okay, just I'm hoping it's just the snow, but anyway, let's continue. So just out of interest, when did you grow up knowing about your dad's background, or do you remember a moment when he sat you down and told you about it?
No, I don't remember a moment at all. And it's weird because, I mean, the only moment that I vaguely remember from my childhood was actually with my grandma, who we called Mama, that she was giving a talk to a group of ladies. I don't know what it was, some kind of guild or group. And it was about what had happened, about their life. And I remember a moment with her where I knew she was doing this talk. I don't remember, other than that, specifically having a conversation, which was like, this is what happened to us, this is your history. But it's kind of just always been there, you know. I suppose, I don't know whether it's just part of the Jewish experience, is that, you know, we've come from this kind of oppression and these kind of escapes and survival and diaspora. I don't know what it is, but it's like it's always been in me. But I don't remember a time when I didn't know it, but I don't remember specifically being told the story. Yeah.
So another thing that's quite common with second generation, like ourselves, is that often there's one person in the family who is the torchbearer, who takes the responsibility or the honor or the burden, however you view it, of continuing the family story and legacy. Do you think that's something that, a role that you've taken on? You know, how do you feel about?
I don't know. I've never, I mean, I didn't know that. So
I didn't know until recently, but it does resonate with me. So
I mean, it resonates in the sense that my dad in the last few years has become very passionate about sharing his story. He's 90 now, and he's I'm not sure how many years. I think it might be because he and I went to Vienna together. He's taken most of the family to Vienna, and we went there together for a long weekend. And while we were there, we went to this amazing museum called the Third Man Museum, that's run by somebody who's become a dear friend of the family. And actually, I videoed my dad talking then about it, and they've got that video there. And I wonder if so I'm thinking it was probably been about the last 10 years that my dad's been really talking, but it's become a really big thing for him. So perhaps he would see himself as a person who has done that, and maybe you know, within the family, you know, I've got a brother and a sister, and we all, you know, we're all equally proud of my dad and his storytelling and the background that we have. Maybe this book is part of me taking that on and taking it forward. I don't know. I don't feel like that about it myself. I suppose I just think I'm a writer, and this is a book that was, you know, a really passionate thing for me to do.
Okay, great. Okay, what were the challenges of writing about such a difficult subject for younger readers?
I mean, yeah, that's a really good question, because, you know, that where do I stop telling about the challenges? I mean, the first challenge really was, I mean, even before getting started on the writing, the first challenge was probably, for me personally, was probably going from someone who, as a writer, is known for writing books about mermaids and fairies and time travel, to doing something that's so different. And in order to do that, I felt quite a strong need to break away from, I left my publisher of about 17 years, and I wanted to write this with no expectations, with no thought of who I'm even writing it for. I just wanted it to be about the story and characters. So I kind of shed that first obstacle, I suppose, before I even started. Biggest challenge in some ways was the research. You know, I immersed myself in Holocaust experiences for 2019, for the whole year really, whether that was reading books or studying online or conversations. But the biggest part of it, that was probably the most challenging thing I've done as a writer, was Laura, my wife, and I went on a research trip. We went off in a van for 3 weeks. We went to 5 countries in Central Europe. We went to 4 concentration camps. We went on countless walking tours, went to museums and synagogues, and putting ourselves in front of the horrors of the concentration camps over and over again was one of the toughest things I've ever done. And then I suppose, coming back to the point of the question about writing for young people, that, you know, as the story emerged and as I realized that actually, you know, I do write for young people, and this was, I mean, I think more than anything I've written before, it hopefully has crossover appeal for adults without people having to think, oh, I'm reading a children's book. It's just a book. But essentially it is for young people too. You know, the challenges there are kind of, how do I ensure that I am respectful, that I am truthful and authentic in the story, and match that up with not being too brutal or soul destroying for children. Because I didn't want this to be a book that fluffs the facts. It's not a fable, it's not a fairy tale, it's not, you know, this is about the facts, and it's rooted in reality. And I went to a lot of trouble and spoke to a lot of people to ensure that the research was, you know, that the book was as authentic as possible. So yeah, but it's really hard. I fought for an age marker, so we said 12 plus. I would have liked it to be a little bit higher, actually, but I definitely wasn't prepared for it to be lower. I'm very adamant that this is not a book that should be used in primary schools at all. We've got a content warning at the front that I wanted. So I've scaled back a few scenes where it was maybe a little bit too brutal, a bit harsh, but without giving up the reality of it. So yeah, it was a tightrope walk, really, the whole thing. Sorry, that was a really long answer, but there was a lot of challenges in lots of different ways.
It was fine. And actually somebody asked, let me get their name, Jill Rosenheim asked, what age is the book aimed at? So you answered that question. Yeah, I mean, I've read it, and it was quite sad, very sad at the end. And I didn't feel at all like, oh, I'm reading a book for, you know, for young children. So, you know, so I think that's you definitely tick that box. So what do you think is the best age to tell children about the Holocaust? And I think the reason I'm asking this is because I remember being completely traumatized going to Yad Vashem at 16 years old on a Maccabi Israel tour, and with no preparation at all. We were put in this classroom, and they played an episode of The World at War which was obviously the liberation, I realise now, of Belsen with the bodies, and it was, I still have nightmares about that. It's so I don't know what is the age. And
I mean, yeah, I'm not an educator. I was a teacher, but I'm not an educator. And for me, a lot of, like with this book in particular, I feel that the gatekeepers, if you like, the librarians, the teachers, the booksellers, the parents, I feel a real kind of sense of partnership with them, and hope that, that the adults who are involved in buying and sharing this book will know their young people well enough to work with them, to share it with them in ways that are okay. I mean, I think it's about layering, to be honest with you. I think that in a primary school, you can talk about empathy, you can talk about bullying, you can talk about peer pressure. I don't think that, and the Holocaust is taught to a certain extent in primary schools, but you wouldn't start to get graphic, I mean, there are guidelines on this. There's the AJR guidelines, and the Holocaust Educational Trust have very clear guidelines that they work with in the educational regard. So I'm not the expert on that, but I do believe that it's about layering, and it's about having a very strong sense of appropriateness in terms of how far you go at different points. And I mean, you said you were 16. I was 50 something when I did the research trip, and I stood at the end of the tracks at Birkenau, and kind of couldn't get the feeling that, the Laura at the end of the day, I remember she was like trying to get the dust off her shoes, and it was this sense that we couldn't get it out from under our skin. It was traumatizing. So to some extent, the closer you come to confronting all of this, it doesn't matter what age you are, it's about looking after your mental health as well, really. So I would say, if people are asking that question, go to places like the Holocaust Educational Trust. We have got a teacher's pack that's been made for this book, which is brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic. If anyone is interested, then if you have some way of me being able to share it with you, it's freely available, and I'd love to get that out there for teachers to use. But yeah, it's a very complex question, and I think there are people out there who are working every day on answering it.
Yeah.
By the way, my face has gone really red. I've got a heater the other side of the room, and it's on quite high because it was cold when I got here. So apologies
still coming in
for the state of my face.
No, we're not. No, we're just really interested in what you're saying. So. Okay, so I had a question, and actually Carolyn has asked the same question, which is, so I'll take her wording. Someone else is coming in. Let me just admit them. So, were the chapters about Max written in the third person to keep a distance between him and us? And I would just maybe explain to the people who might not have read it that it's written. There are three characters, Leo and Elsa. Sorry?
I'm taking my heater off while you explain.
Okay, so Leo and Elsa are Jewish, and their chapters are written in the first person, and Max is not Jewish, and his character is written in the third person. So was that too? And while we're talking about Max, there's another question as well from Elizabeth Hutchinson. I found it fascinating to read Max's story. Was it difficult to write his character? So all about Max now. Okay,
so we'll talk about that. So yeah, so from the narrative point of view, the book is told, like you said, it's told through the interweaving stories of three characters, Leo, Elsa, and Max. So Leo's story, which is the one that most closely resembles my dad's experiences, is told in the first person, in the past tense. And I've got to be really careful about spoilers, because I've got to be a bit careful about what I say, but I have a sense of Leo kind of, he's looking, in a way we're looking back, we're telling his story from a slight distance in that respect. It's first person, so we're right in there with him, but it's sort of being told. Elsa's is first person in the present tense. Now Elsa was the character who, I suppose is the answer to the question that I asked, the what if question. Elsa doesn't have the moment of good fortune that Leo has. And so the exploration of her story was very painful and upsetting. And the first person with her present tense made me feel really close to her. And it's quite strange as an author because I feel so protective of this character. She's, out of all the characters I've written, Elsa's the one who I kind of want to be close to her. I feel this sense of protectiveness and compassion for her. And the present tense, her story is very present and very immediate. And then there was Max, and, you know, he's going to go on to join the Hitler Youth, and his father is rises through the Nazi ranks. And there were quite a few reasons, you know, stylistically, it was like, right, so I've got first person past, first person present, what shall I do with Max? But I had this very, I suppose for me as the writer, I kind of wanted that little bit of distance. And I also felt that I wasn't really keen to invite the reader that deeply into the mind of going into that world. I wanted, again, it felt like it was about respect. It was about, I'm just going to keep that at a tiny distance. It's a very close third person. And I do feel that we're, as readers, you know, you get inside his head, you do, you know, you're following his story very closely, but there's just that tiny little veil that just keeps it at a slight distance. And it was, you know, I just feel that it's about a little bit of respect, a little bit of kind of protection. And I also feel that as an author, once you've written a book, it's out there. So you don't really get to say, you know, quite often people tell me what my books are about a long time after I've written them. And I realize that they're right. And they tell me things that I never knew. So I'm actually looking forward to, you know, classrooms of children discussing, you know, these particular narrative choices and coming up with their own reasons and what it means to them, because I think they're, the way it affects them is just as important as the reasons why I did it.
People joining us all the time. Sorry, I was just letting it in, so that's great. I'm not sure if you answered this before, but I'll ask the question anyway. So how did you decide how graphic to be in your description of the camps and treatment of Jews, bearing in mind the age that you aimed the book at? But then you said you did tone it down a bit, or if that's the right word, but you said you did cut some bits out that were graphic.
I mean, this was one of the most challenging parts of the process, to be honest with you, Deborah. It was, you know, so I mean, when I wrote the first draft, we'd come back from this research trip, slightly traumatized, mental health on the floor, and needing to kind of recover. And actually, I feel like I wrote this first draft almost as it was almost a cathartic experience, I suppose. I wrote it in like a frenzied artist in the garret that doesn't do anything other than write. I couldn't stop. I wrote the first draft in about 5 weeks. And then, you know, there's always a process of editing where things are put in, things are taken out, things are changed. But with this book in particular, I had conversations with lots more people than I normally would. I spoke to a number of experts in different areas in their field. I've seen Jamie Ashworth here, and he was somebody that I had a lot of conversations with. He was incredibly helpful. He's a Holocaust expert and educator, and we had some extremely interesting conversations about responsibility, particularly with the final scenes. And, you know, I made adjustments to certain things I didn't, you know, that could have been seen almost as romantic. I made adjustments. I took a long time getting the last part of Elsa's story right, because at one point there was a bit too much casual violence, and instead I turned the scene into something where she kind of owned it with a bit of dignity for herself. There's a scene in cattle trucks on the way to Auschwitz, which is one of the most distressing scenes, I think. I took quite a bit out of that. So yeah, there was a process of kind of looking at it and saying, do I have to go there? Do I have to go that far? You know, I'm going there, I'm being truthful, but do I have to go that far? And it was through a process of lots of conversations with people, and then lots of conversations with my editor, and you know, it's writing a book is not something that's just done on your own, you know. Then this book, more than any, has involved a lot of people helping me make the right decisions, hopefully make the right decisions along the way.
Yeah, well, I think you definitely hit the right note. And you just said about Elsa that you wanted her to own it. That's in the last scene. Right, my connection is unstable again. Okay, Alex, be on standby. Right, we've got
It's live, we're all unstable.
right, live from Edgware in the snow. Okay, so, and how does your father feel about this book?
Oh, my dad.
Harry?
My dad is super proud. You know, like I said earlier, he's been involved in doing talks about his story for quite a long time now, and you know, and he loves to share the story. But I think he's really proud of me, that I've taken this on as well, and that I'm you know, I've been inspired by his story to write a book of my own. He's very proud of me. He thinks the book's great. You know, and I know it's not my mum's story, but my mum is really proud of me as well, and my sister and my brother. My sister's here, you know, and my nieces. And in fact, one of the things that touched me the most was my nephew the other day, he's in his 20s, and he sent me a text late at night saying, "Liz, this book is something else entirely," and it just meant so much to me. And then we have Friday night candles on Zoom with the family, which is so lovely, and you know, and he was there just talking to me about it, and you know, just having these young people in my life read it who aren't just doing it as a favor like they might have done, you know, when another mermaid book's come out. You know, they're doing it for their own pleasure. So it's, you know, it feels very much a family experience. And you know, my wife Laura, she's like, you know, part of everything that I do. I couldn't do without her. So, you know, I just want to say it's not, you know, it isn't, I don't just do this in isolation. And I feel like a lot of people have been involved in getting this book to where it is. Sorry, that sounded a bit like a kind of, I don't know.
Your Oscar acceptance.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Fantastic. No, I mean, it does, you know, it does feel, when I was reading it, and it does feel like a really important book. You know, I think, I can see, I've read, you know, some of the reviews and the reactions of people, and it does, you know, it seems like it's going to be one of the classics and go to, you know, schools and be used for educational purposes. Oh, well, yeah, that's my thought. So, and
I've gone red again now, and I've turned the heater on.
well, and obviously Holocaust, I mean, I don't know, it's almost like, well, because I've written a book and you've written a book in the genre and everything, but it does seem to be a very popular genre at the moment. I don't know, maybe it's always been that popular myself. I didn't read any Holocaust books up till 10 years ago. I mean, I still haven't seen Schindler's List, and I haven't been to Auschwitz, so, and I know I should go, but I just can't face it at the moment. But now it does say, I mean, you can go to any bookshop when you're allowed to, and you got this of Auschwitz and that of Auschwitz, and this. Why do you think? Do you know what's your thoughts about why these are so popular at the moment?
Yeah, it's weird. I wrote an article for The Guardian actually that was in last week about this experience of the sort of the discomfort mixed with also being glad that people are reading these books. And I had a few messages on Twitter from people saying, well, isn't that hypocritical that you're saying you're uncomfortable with it and yet you've written a book about it? And it's interesting because, you know, you'll know, Deborah, that when you write a book, it's a long time until the book actually comes out. And in fact, when I wrote my novel, Read Me Like a Book, which was about a girl coming out, I mean, it was the first book I'd ever written. And it was about 8 years ago. And Laura and I were going to be getting married. And I thought, it's time for me to give this another go because no one wanted it the first time round. And my publisher at the time said, you know, times have changed and we're ready to move with them and let's do it. And so they did. And it turned out that as that came out, the whole kind of LGBT thing became the latest thing. And, you know, and by the time your book comes out, people are like, oh, you're just riding on the coattails of that, are you? And I'm like, no, I wrote this 16 years ago, actually. And it's like now, you know, this book has been in my mind for 10 years. I started writing it 2 years ago. But you're right, it definitely seems like it's a bit of a thing. Look, if the books are well researched, if they're truthful, if they are sharing the stories, whether it's fictional or factual accounts, if they're doing it in a respectful and authentic and truthful way, I'd much rather deal with having slightly uncomfortable feelings myself if it means people are reading about it. You know, another 10, 15, 20 years time, it's highly unlikely there'll be anyone alive who actually lived through that period. So, you know, we do need to keep the stories alive. So, you know, I'm happy to have a bit of discomfort if it means that people still know that these things happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as I said, we were talking before about being second generation. I mean, what does that mean for you? I mean, does it even come into your mind at the moment? That's me, because I'm working on a second generation project for AJR, so that's, you know, very much in my forethought. But what about you?
It's a weird one because, you know, when I was growing up, I can't think of a time when I ever thought my dad and my grandparents are refugees, are immigrants. And on the other side, on my mother's side of the family, we only have to go back one more generation. My great grandparents came from Russia at the turn of last century. And I don't think I'd ever thought, you know, my family were refugees. I'm a second generation. I never consciously had those thoughts. And so externally, I suppose, I've never been conscious that this is something that my family is or was, or that I am, or anything. But I think that actually I've been thinking about this over, I suppose, really recently, like during these last few months towards, you know, the book coming out. And I think that the experience of it is a really deep part of who I am. You know, like I said before, when I'm writing books, I'm quite often told afterwards what the book was about. Like Emily Windsnap, I keep on thinking I'm writing books about mermaids, and actually they keep on being about different communities reaching out to each other and getting over their hatred and fear and prejudice of each other so that they can, you know, the mer people community and the humans, and Emily Windsnap standing up in Neptune's court to say people should be allowed to marry who they want, and people coexisting and building bridges, and it's about kindness and connection and standing up for what you believe in. So I actually think that the experience of who I am and where my family has come from has always been a sort of flame inside me that's burned with quite a strong passion. I never really realized until recently how much that has affected it, though. But I think it's a big part of who I am and how I see the world and what I hope to put into the world. So yeah, it's like my books. It's a big important thing that I actually never realized, like why or where it came from or what it was.
I haven't read about your mermaids, so but they sound great actually. So maybe I'll give them a read.
Yeah, they're quite cool.
She sounds like quite a character, that Emily.
Yeah, I call her a tomboy mermaid, but she's quite, you know, she's pretty cool.
So when did you start writing? When did you?
Well, my very first published work was Jinx's Shop, that was in the Manchester Evening News in 1976. I used to, when I do school events, see, in the days when we used to go to places, I'd take this newspaper cutting of Emily Windsnap and I'd say, who was alive in 1976? Actually, there was one time I asked that, and literally no one in the hall, including the head teacher, who was there, nobody put their hands up. It was the first time I realized I was the oldest person in a room of 300 people. Anyway, so Jinx's Shop, yeah, it was a poem. And I was 9, and that was my first ever published work. And then that was my creative peak for about 30 years, I think. So, and then I started again, and Emily Windsnap, the first one came out in 2003. And I've just been at it since then.
And very successfully, 5 million books.
I know, that's, yeah, sorry. Mostly in America and mostly mermaids. So I think I was lucky to catch a wave with that one. Excuse me.
Nice one. So let's see. I think I've asked most of these questions. Well, so what next? Anyway, so are you going back to the younger readers? Do you think you'll stick with older readers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit, I feel like I'm in a very strange situation now, really, because I had times when I thought I've written myself into a corner, because I thought, I don't think I can face going quite so deeply into the horrors of the Holocaust. But if not, then what do I do? And where do you get, I don't feel like I can kind of jump back to mermaids from there. Although actually over the next couple of years, and my American publisher is bringing out younger Emily Windsnap books, like picture books, which are very cute. I just got the final artwork the other day. So they're kind of existing at the same time. But no, it's been really strange. I think, you know, when you've written a book, you have to kind of let things lie fallow for a while. And normally, like the last few weeks on a book, I'm like, oh, all I want to do is finish it. And then I finish it and I'm like, oh, thank goodness for that. I'm going to collapse and do nothing. And then by like 24 hours later, I'm like, my life is meaningless and I'm writing. So I'm on the next project. But with this one, I have definitely had an extended break. So this is a really, I'm sort of hoping I'll waffle on for long enough, you'll forget what you asked and I don't need to answer, because I don't know, actually. But
Oh yeah, no, I've got
an inkling of an idea that might come after this, but it's quite hard to know. It's quite hard to follow this. Pick myself up and sort of, yeah. But Simon and Schuster are so amazing. I just would like to keep working with them.
Well, that's nice. So I mean, yeah, I mean, when I was writing my book, it was so emotional. And in fact, what I did was I wrote, it was 99% finished, and I just kept delaying that end bit because
Really?
I didn't want to think about what came next. So I literally put it down for about a year and a half. But I mean, one of my characters is based on my mum, and I had to write thinking about the cat. I changed her name, and I kept thinking of her as a character rather than my mum, because I wouldn't have been able to write it. Otherwise, I was so emotionally connected to the whole story. But yeah, it is
more closely connected to your family. Mine, like Leo in my story, is inspired by my dad's story, but it's definitely his own story. He's his own character. So I never felt like I'm telling my dad's story, but I think yours is much closer, isn't it, to the events of your
yeah, but it is very draining. Right, let's see what questions we have here. I'm going to go back. Hold on one second. So we've asked one about Max, the age. Judith Gordon has told us, which I think we know, the Holocaust is taught in schools in year 6, final year in primary school. When I asked you about what you thought was the best age to teach, and we talked about Max. Charlotte, do you feel writing this book has exorcised traumas or feelings that have been around for many years?
Oh, it's an interesting question. I wouldn't put it, that sounds quite exercising demon sounds like getting something negative and horrible out of me in a way, and I wouldn't really put it like that. I'd say it was a much more positive thing, that I wanted to write a story that was inspired by you know, real events in my family that were about the kindness of strangers and the generosity of people, that meant that my family survived. And that was the motivating force. And I should say that actually, you know, I know the book goes to dark places, but it is essentially a book about hope, and it is about kindness, and it is about friendship, kind of surviving despite incredible challenges. So I wouldn't put it like that, but I would definitely say that when I wrote the book, it felt like I was getting the experience of the research trip out of me, because that left me quite ragged, to be honest. So it was, you know, it was quite, you know, it was very upsetting. You know, we went to Dachau and Mauthausen and Auschwitz and Birkenau, and you know, to be there again and again was so upsetting. And so I think I kind of worked a lot of the grief of that experience out of me through the writing. Yeah. And there were some lovely things I did. So Elsa is named after my great aunt Elsa, and we found her name in the Book of Names at Auschwitz. She was murdered at Auschwitz. And, there are other characters who are named people in my family, and so there's something about that that just feels like a kind of continuing on of their names. So there was definitely a positive side to it, but I think, yeah, it was definitely a book that's been in me in some way for a long time, and yeah, it's good to have got it out. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about particularly the children who were killed in the Holocaust, I get so angry that I, having written my book and giving some light to their stories and helping people who might not know about them learn about them, and hopefully, educating them in the dangers of
Yeah.
hatred, helps me feel like I'm doing the only thing that I could possibly do to help these poor wretched souls not be forgotten. And yeah, so
I agree with you, Deborah, and I think it's very important to say that I don't know if you feel the same, but in writing this book, I never set out for this to be a book about a time in history, and that this is a history book and that's that. Part of the motivating factor for me wasn't just the story within my family, it was also the state of the world today, the rise in fascism in Europe and now in America. I mean, the terrifying events that took place just a few weeks ago in America, and Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism and racism and the terrible things that are happening across the world today. That was part of, that was a big motivating factor for me, that it's not just about we must never forget these events. It was about wanting young readers to read this book and kind of relate to it also and think, oh yeah, Max is taken in by these ideas, he wants to fit in, he wants to be one of the strong ones, and maybe I felt like that, maybe I've been drawn towards the bullies sometimes, and just to kind of ask themselves these questions today, make it relevant and accessible today, feels like a really important thing to be.
And actually Barbara has asked something about similar. So she says she hasn't been able to read the book yet because the pandemic has, I'm going to read this. The pandemic has taken away what was previously my naive and complacent unconscious belief that such things can't happen to me. Do you think the pandemic has perhaps made the book resonate more for that reason? A lot of people have seen that one's life can easily be turned upside down.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. In the reviews and when people have posted about the book on Twitter, there's a passage that they've quoted probably more than any other, and it's a passage from Elsa, where she talks about how quickly the unthinkable becomes the new normal. It's probably my favorite passage in the book in a way, and I think people relate to that. I think people are quoting it because they relate to it so much that, even just a year ago, if we'd have thought that we'd have all been stuck at home wearing masks to go in a shop, and the extent of what we're doing, we just wouldn't have believed it, and yet we're just doing it every day now. So I think in a sense it does resonate. I mean, in another way, from my point of view, I kind of thought, oh my God, this is coming out at a time when people are having such a terrible time in their lives. Are they going to want to read about something that's, so awful? Surely young people are going to want uplifting, light-hearted, escapist fantasy. But then, like I said, hopefully the hope at the heart of it is comes through. Yeah, I think it probably does resonate in lots of strange ways that we could never anticipate it, and in some ways that we probably don't even know now, and won't know till we look back on this period.
Yeah. So the new normal. You wrote that.
Yeah.
You came up with that saying.
Yeah. Sorry.
Right. We've got a question, or rather a statement from Jacqueline. Resense the sensibilities of young readers. She says, I feel it is important to remember that there is no censorship of experience, and young children everywhere in the Holocaust and other social situations have to confront violence and death. Sharing such experiences possibly has a positive effect on those children who feel their own experiences are unspeakable. I mean, certainly there are plenty of horrific things still going on in parts of the world. So
yeah, and you know, I just to pick up on that, I mean, it's weird because I mean, I've always, up until this book, I've always written the books that I write for the 8 to 12-year-old age group. You know, a lot of the time parents tell me how they're really glad of these books because they're wholesome. They know there's nothing to be afraid of. They know that their 8-year-old is safe with these books. And that's partly why I've been so adamant that this book mustn't sit on the same shelves. Because I don't want some parents seeing it and thinking, oh, it's a new Liz Kessler and buying it for their 8-year-old mermaid fan. But I think also, you know, it's just about how you do it. It's not about censoring telling the story. It's about doing it in a way that's, you know, that's palatable, I suppose. But I have to say as well, I think that sometimes young people can handle more than we can as adults. I remember some years ago, I was reading, right, my sister will probably remember, and I can't remember what the book is called. I was reading a book that traumatized me. It's about a family that did terrible things to a child that was kept in a cellar. It absolutely traumatized me. I couldn't get it out of my thoughts for about a week. And then I found out that my niece, who was probably about 10, 11 at the time, had also read it. She was like, yeah, it didn't bother her anywhere near as much as it had bothered me. And I think as adults, you know, we accumulate so much baggage and so much more anxiety, and we know so much more that I think sometimes things have more resonance, create more anxiety for us as adults. And we can possibly sometimes be in danger of thinking we have to be too careful with young people where they can handle more than we think.
yeah, also they have access to a lot more than we did when we were children.
Yeah.
So yeah, nothing shocks them
Abomination.
more.
Abomination.
Sorry? You're cutting out. Say that again.
The book was called Abomination.
Oh, I won't read it. I don't like it. That sounds no, not my cup of tea. Annie Everall says, I think that books like this are even more important in today's world so that we help our children and young people understand what happened and we never forget. So that's,
Thank
yeah,
you, Annie.
Absolutely.
Annie Everall is the person who produced the teachers pack that I mentioned earlier. And it's absolutely brilliant. Anyone involved in education, please get in touch to find out how to get hold of this. It's free and it's really wonderful.
So do you know what ages it's written for, the teachers pack, or what?
Yeah, it's aimed at 12 plus because that's what we, you know, the book is aimed at. But I think we specified year 8 and above, just because in year 7 that just still felt a little bit too close. So I think we said year 8 and 9, might be 8, 9, 10. But it's all, the information's all in there, and it's just full of really interesting activities. But the passages that have been chosen are not graphic and brutal. It's a really good pack. Just for getting into.
I did a talk the week of Holocaust Memorial Day with a school, and I did the whole school, secondary school, and so that it was on Teams, I think it was, or Google or something. It wasn't Zoom. Anyway, I couldn't see the audience because I started with my PowerPoint presentation and I'm telling my mother's story and everything, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, I stopped sharing my screen and I was confronted with this sea of sweet, innocent little faces. I mean, they were just so gorgeous. And I was like, and then the teacher said, okay, girls, off to, it was a girls' school, okay, girls, off to your next class, you know, virtually. And I was there and I went, oh my goodness, are they going to be all right?
I know.
So worried. Because there was just, no, I mean, obviously, hopefully they found it really interesting and they were just this sea of faces. And yeah, I mean, you never know, do you? You don't know, so. Anyway.
No, and even it doesn't have to be children. I've had messages from adults telling me that, you know, they couldn't sleep because they were crying too much at the end of the book. And I've never apologized to so many people after I've had a book out, because, you know, I in the past, if someone says, oh, your book made me cry, I'd be like, yay, I've done my job. Yeah. But say about this book, I don't feel like it's a reason to celebrate. I just want to apologize and sort of give them a hug, which obviously no one can do now anyway. So
yeah, I get reviews like, well, I can't say I enjoyed this book because of the subject.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Barbara says, I think one of the most important things for younger children is to be given permission to be themselves. I think that's why the Emily Windsnap books ring such a bell. It's a very similar message to Frozen, which is very, very powerful to young girls. The idea that you can be yourself and be accepted and loved for it.
Oh, thank you, Barbara.
That's nice. So what age are the Emily Windsnap books?
Well, I mean, officially they're 8 to 12, but they're probably more like the core Emily super fans are probably 8-9-year-olds. Yeah, but there's 9 of them. There was only going to be 2, and there are 9 now.
But tell me something very important. Is she Jewish?
Emily? No, although my brother pointed out years ago that the whole thing was an analogy for being gay, coming out as gay. So she could be Jewish if you want her to be Jewish. She could be like, she kind of, I feel like Emily possibly does have quite a lot of universal themes. And I think that's maybe why, like Barbara's right, you know, and I think that people see their own stories in her a bit. And, you know, there are universal themes in there about being yourself and kind of standing up to bullies and sort of, I don't know, lots of fantasy stuff, really. But it's quite strange at the moment because, you know, I'm getting tweets on the one hand from head teachers saying, this book is so much, so deep, and I went to sleep crying and thinking about it, and then the next minute I got an email from a 9-year-old going, oh my God, I just love Emily Winstap, is there going to be a 10th one? And kind of going between these two completely different kind of things is, is insane.
Right, one more question. I think actually we've got, if anybody's got any final questions, please write it in the chat. But there's a question here from Laura, which is, what do you want most for this book, Liz? So she obviously knows you.
I think that's my wife.
Ah!
What do I want most for it? You know, it's weird. What I want most, if I could like just have one thing, I suppose it would be for it to be discussed by young people in classrooms, in groups, and for it to affect the way that, you know, to sort of make them question, you know, who they want to be and which side of things they want to stand on, and, you know, maybe see themselves in the characters and maybe feel empowered to be stronger and develop more empathy. And, you know, it's not big sales, it's not movie deals, it's not awards, it's not really that. It's just, I would like to connect with people's hearts and, you know, and feel that this book makes people think and maybe makes them act. But hopefully, honestly, obviously act in the ways that I want them to act, not kind of be drawn towards Max's story, but to see the, you know, the reality and for that to affect people's decision. And, you know, the end of the book has a sense of a baton being passed on. And I'd love to think of young people reading it and feeling very strongly that it's being passed on to them and wanting to continue this fight. That's what I want most for the book.
Yeah, lovely. And one last question then from Irene. Which novels about the Holocaust resonated for you?
Oh, I mean, I read so many. I was a bedraggled mess by the end of it. Resonated for me the most, I mean, it's hard to say, you know, because we went to Anne Frank's house in Amsterdam, and, you know, and that's so amazing. And then you've got the Maurice Gleitzman series. I think the one that stands out for me as the most incredible book is Mouse, which is what do you call it? You don't call it a comic book. What's the word I'm looking for?
A cartoon comic.
Yeah,
graphic novel.
Graphic novel. Yeah. Graphic novel.
Thank you. My brain's gone. And it's incredible. It's just so incredible. Oh, thanks, Annie. Graphic novel. Yes, everybody. I mean, you know, When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit is another one because it's, you know, it's so close. It's a refugee story. And what I love about that is that the children are so innocent and, you know, they have no sense of what's going on. It's the opposite of mine in terms of going into the horrors, because it doesn't at all. It's hard, sorry, it's hard to choose one book. And I'd like to say, now that I've kind of, all the publicity and everything's calming down a bit, that my next book is going to be The Young Survivors, and I will put that on my list of books that I'll be recommending too, by Debra Barnes.
Oh, I thought you meant the next one to write. I thought, wait a minute, that's a nice title.
No, asking about what resonates with me, because I really can't wait to read it.
which funnily enough, I mean, it's written through the eyes of 3 children in the first person. So, you know.
I do want to mention one more book that I'd love to make people aware of, which is a book called What We're Scared Of by Karen David. It's not about the Holocaust, but it's about modern day anti-Semitism. It came out on the same day as mine, actually. And we've been quite, you know, closely connected with each other during the process of writing as well. And it's a really wonderful book that actually looks at, you know, today. And I think actually reading in conjunction with each other is quite a powerful thing to do.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to reading that book as well. So lovely. Okay, well, that's it. We are done. So thank you so much. Thank you everybody for coming along. You're all muted, but if you want to give a virtual round of applause.
So much for having me. Thank you for listening.
If you haven't read it yet, it's do get it. I believe it's like in supermarkets, right? I saw a photo of it on a shelf in, I'm not going to supermarkets myself.
Yeah, it's in Sainsbury's, but
Sainsbury's
and Amazon, but you know, I'd love people to do click and collect with their local independent bookshops as well.
Yeah.
Customers, you know, more than ever. So yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure, and it's a brilliant book. So I'm sure it's going to do really well. It is doing really well. So fantastic. Brilliant. Okay, lovely. Well, thank you, Liz, and thank you, everybody. And